Greetings and welcome to another video in which I'm going to talk about my early cel animation and in particular the production of a couple of TV pilots. This video is a follow-up to the last video on this channel, which was called Animating for the BBC, and in which I told you about the 6 years I worked some of the time producing cartoon animation inserts for a BBC children's programme called Heartbeat. And that was back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and during that time, and indeed before that time, I produced a lot of other animation, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. Now, in the last video I did say I was going to be digitally reshooting some of my previous cel animation. I do still plan on doing that. You'll learn more about that in this video. That'll be coming up on this channel in the future. And I'm also going to be making content about things like painting animation cels, various animation techniques, because lots of people have asked me to make content about that, so I'll be doing that. But it seemed a good idea to continue for now with the story of all the different animation I've made in the past. Now, as I explained in my last video, all of my Heartbeat animation was shot on rostrum cameras at the BBC. But for my other cel animation, I used my own self-built rostrum. This has a Super 8mm film camera and lights mounted above a base that could move on its X and Y axis. Over time, the rostrum evolved through 3 iterations, and what we're looking at here is the second iteration. And in the final version, I added control electronics with a frame counter, as well as the ability to shoot continuously at 1 frame a second. And it was all controlled by a trigger unit with a flex that came from an old razor. And guess what? Whilst I no longer have the whole rostrum, I do still have the base. And here it is. I got it out from a box under a bed this morning. I'll take off this piece of paper. I have taken that off already. The only thing I've done to it is to clean the glass. And the way this basically works is a piece of glass which can flatten down to hold all the cels in place. This actually had some elastic bands, which you've got the remnants of them here. They haven't lasted. You put things on 30 years later, they've all gone wrong and terrible, isn't it? Anyway, the idea was it kept the glass at the right angle when I lifted it up. It sort of moves around too much now. But this actually rested against the back pedestal of the rostrum. I've put behind me here, you can't see off camera here, but I put a lighting stand just to hold that safely in place. And we can see here probably the last things I was shooting. When you shot film, you put on the front of the film what it was you were shooting. And I didn't just use this rostrum to shoot final animation, I also use it to shoot what are called line tests or pencil tests of animation for Heartbeat, as we can see. So before I actually traced from drawings onto cel and painted them in, before you do that, which is an expensive process, you shoot all the animation just from the drawings first, see if it works, and then you can work on the final, producing the final cels. Anyway, what else is under here? This is clearly a thing with graduations on to help me do movements on the base, all by hand of course. Take that off as well. And we've got here a piece of Pantone paper, a field guide. You can see there are 2 peg bars. These are in slots, so in theory they will slide about. Now in fact they seem to have stuck a bit, and I'm not going to force them right now, but in theory these can slide. You can see there's a graduation mark there, so you can slide it and put marks down so you can work out where you're sliding it. And there's also the ability to move the whole thing. I think I'll just bring the glass down for that. So this moves up and down because it's mounted on a board that allows that with bits of aluminium, so you can frame it on the y-axis like that as we just move it like that. Does it go any further? No, it's obviously stopped there, Chris, but anyway, we'll pull it back to wherever it was. It's a little bit stiff over the years. That's hardly to be surprised. I'm a bit stiff over the years as well. And if we look at the top here, you'll see this little plastic bits. Those actually went onto a sort of a gully at the top, which allowed you to move things this direction. There was also a guide at the bottom, keep that going. This, of course, can all be rebuilt. If I'm going to be reshooting animation digitally, I'm going to need a rostrum, and I'm going to use this as the base of it and build something up to allow me to put a video camera above this thing in the future. So, anyway, what I'm sure you want to see is how basically it was used. So let's basically just put that glass up like that again, and we'll just put in a piece of something soft so we don't do any damage to artwork. It's great to be doing this again, that'll be fine. And I've got over here, this is a field, a layout for a particular shot in an animation I'll be talking about a bit later in the video. So this shows you where the camera would actually be filming. You'd use this to put it on the rostrum, set the camera up, then get rid of that. Then we'd add a background This is a background. Something else has come up in my hand as well, but this is a background. There we are. Where is it gone? I'm working from a very strange angle here, but hopefully there we are. There is a airbrushed background. And then I've got a lower cell somewhere, if I can just find it over here. All sorts of things are going on off camera, as you might be able to imagine, but I'll be back with you in a second. Here we are. Here's some lower cells. We'll put those on like that and just smooth them down. There we are. That's the base of a shot. And then I've also got the top cell here, which I'll put on like this. This was a cycle on top to produce animation. That's got its tissue on. Let's remove the tissue like that. There we are. There's a character being rocked in a little chair there by this character. His legs are below and the rest of the character's on top. Glass would go down and that will be ready to take a frame of that particular animation. And if you're wondering, yes, you have to be very careful about lighting and all sorts of problems you'd have with Cel, because you could get things called Newton rings if you've got pressure points on the glass. You had to use lights with polarizers on, things like that. I haven't got any of that going on here, so there's all sorts of reflections coming up in the glass here. But this is the principle. This is how we used, in the old days, a rostrum base to shoot Cel animation. My first animated film was called Ken and the Loch Ness Monster and was made in 1983 using puppets. It was also a great beginning, as it was a runner-up in the BBC Screen Test Young Filmmakers competition in 1983. Part of the film was broadcast on BBC One, so it was my first proper telly, and earned me this Young Filmmaker Certificate of Merit. I subsequently made a few more puppet animations, including Ken and the Haunted Castle, with significantly improved puppets and sets, as well as a film called Survival that featured spaceships, aliens and dinosaurs. However, in 1985, when I went to study economics at university, out of practicality I switched to 2D animation, with the first of these films drawn with marker pens, coloured in with pencils and called Her Other Kind of Reality. And then I finally found a supplier for proper animation paper and peg bars and Cel and things like that, and I built my rostrum and I made my first Cel animation, which was called A Tale of Cyril. And this was a great sort of proving ground, a testing ground for all the films that followed, not least in terms of the production pipeline I put in place, where I shot the film on Super 8mm film. I shot everything perfectly in camera, so I didn't have any editing to do afterwards. Everything was done as it needed to be on one continuous take, as it were. You had things like fades, they were done in camera, so when the film came back, that was the final thing. And what I did was, when I got the film back, I put it to the projector once, and if it was okay, I sent it straight off to another lab, Studio Film and Video Labs in London, to get it transferred professionally to videotape. And in fact, this is the tape for A Tale of Cyril. I can't play this today. This is a 3/4 inch tape, a U-matic tape. This is a 10-minute professional cassette. And the benefit of all this was all the post-production could take place on video, rather than taking place on Super 8mm film, which is not a great post-production media. You just end up with lots and lots of scratched film. You would never, ever sort of shoot a 16mm film or a 35mm film by taking the negative from the camera and then working with it in post-production. You get a print, put it away safely. That's exactly what I was doing with 8mm film, working also on video. And I was very lucky that a school friend of mine, by this time, had got a job in a studio. And he was also a great musician, and so he wrote all the music for A Tale of Cyril, did all the sound effects, put it all together and transferred it to 2-inch videotape. And we managed to sell it to Channel 4, which was a new TV channel in the UK at the time, only a few years old. And it had a programme called World of Animation, a sort of compilation programme where they show lots of different animations were shown in the programme. And this means that A Tale of Cyril was the first film I ever made for which I earned a broadcast fee. Now, following A Tale of Cyril, which in many ways was a success, I sold it to a broadcaster, but I also had problems with the visual style in places. I didn't like the pencil backgrounds, things like that. But following that film, I moved on to what I really wanted to do, which was to produce pilots for animated series of 5-minute animated programs. I loved programs like that as a child. I wanted to make them myself. And the first pilot I made was for a series called The Museum, which was set in, well, a museum, and it had a couple of museum guides and a porter and a mad scientist, and they just did lots of exciting museum-based things. And I did the backgrounds using marker pens, which worked pretty well. I was pleased with that. Although, like everything I'm showing you in this video, the footage is coming from a digitised VHS tape, so the quality is not brilliant. And I should also note that I don't own the rights to the narration or the music for the museum, and this is why here we're looking at silent visuals. But, as you can hopefully see, the museum was a lot more professional. Now, whilst the museum was a big improvement on A Tale of Cyril, it was getting me to the place I wanted to be, producing an animated series for a television company, it was still, in my mind, not quite good enough to start sending around the world. So it was the last pilot I ever made that I never actually sent anywhere to be looked at and possibly commissioned. And one of the reasons for that was because I just sold A Tale of Cyril to Channel 4, as I was talking about a few minutes ago, when I finished making the museum. And therefore I thought, I know, I'm going to move on to make another animated series pilot, my second of 1987, and this was a series called Scumbag. And this wasn't going to be a children's animated show, it was going to be an alternative comedy animated show about a sort of anti-hero called Scumbag. And I actually wrote, I think I wrote 5 final episodes of the 10 I was proposing, and I did send this off to Channel 4 and those other broadcasters, and it didn't actually get picked up in the end, but it was my first really good TV pilot. You could see this would actually have worked. No one was questioning the scripting and the technical nature and all that kind of stuff. This was a good piece of development. So I'd gone from not producing Cel Animation to my third Cel Animation was something I was pleased with as a piece of production. And I've still got all the artwork. Some of it is here, so let's take a look at this. And what we have here first on the top are some drawings. Here are some drawings from the shot we were looking at with the cels earlier in the video. That's not the way to flick them, is it? Let's do it this way. You can see this is a chair being rocked. I think it's a 7 cycle. Some people said on the last video, they said it's surprising how few drawings there are to make the smooth motion. And people always massively overestimate the number of drawings you need for an animated film and underestimate the time it's required to produce each drawing and then each cel. It takes a very long time. And animation for television, and this was certainly the case for me, was always shot on doubles. In other words, you took 2 exposures of each particular drawing, each setup, which meant in the UK you had a final frame rate of 12.5 frames a second, given that we have a frame rate of 25 frames a second effectively for TV in the UK. In the United States, it's a frame rate of 30 for television, and therefore you shot animation at 24 frames a second, and the broadcasters tried to sort it out when they transmitted. Anyway, let's just move this on, because under here there are some cels, and the process of animation is, first of all, you do your drawings, test your drawings by shooting a line test. If that works, you then move on and trace the drawings onto cel, ink on the front and paint on the back. This is the backing cel we saw earlier, and then under here, I should be wearing my gloves. Let me just put my gloves on. There we are, nice clean gloves. And as I was saying, this is the cels we saw in the cycle earlier. I think that's the one we looked at, but there are others underneath as it rocks back and forth. And again, something people commented on in the last video is the quality of the colour you get by painting animation cels this way, with the ink on the front and the paint on the back. And you can see from this, if I just move that on and indeed flick it over, the back where you paint it, it still looks good, but it doesn't look quite as good as the front. You don't get quite the same sort of flat colour. And that's why you paint the cels on the back. Anyway, as you can see, I've still got the artwork for Scumbag. Let's just put it back in a nice, neat fashion like this. And my plan is to digitally reshoot not just some of my heartbeat animations, but also to digitally reshoot and remake the Scumbag animation, because I think it'd be great to remake this pilot, put it up on this channel and bring it to a new audience. And I've got to figure out exactly how to do that. I've got to rebuild the rostrum to do it for a start, and I've also got to figure out what I do with the audio, because once again I don't own the music rights, which is a great shame because the guy did the music, did a fantastic theme for Scumbag, and I also don't own the rights to the narration. But to give you a feel, I've re-recorded myself a bit of a narration for the Scumbag pilot. And so let's now listen in to a bit of Scumbag.
One afternoon, when Scumbag woke up, he discovered that a horrible squashy spot
had oozed itself into existence on his chin. So he went into the bathroom to investigate. After cleaning the mirror, Scumbag went out to find someone who could rid him of his sticky, unwanted facial addition. The first unfortunate he encountered was Anne. "That's a horrible, greasy, slimy, septic mound on your chin," she mused. "Does it hurt?" "Not as much as this," muttered Scumbag, and he gave her a nice punch in the face and went happily on his way. By 1989, I'd graduated from university with an industrial economics degree and was doing the obvious thing, which was to try and work freelance producing children's and other animation. And whilst I hadn't managed to sell the Scumbag series, I was still living the dream, trying to make it work for creating my own TV series, and I was at the time working on my second series of Heartbeat animation, so I had some links into the BBC by that point in time, and I came up with another series idea. Again, a series of 5-minute episodes. 10 episodes in the initial series was again the basic premise, which was a viable commission in television in the UK at that time. And this was a series called The Little Ones, about two toddlers called Morris and Ginny, and about their baby brother, who was just called Baby, who lived in his own completely separate world. And then they had a mother who lived in another separate world and was so tall because she was an adult you never see her all in shot at the same time. You just see her head or feet or legs or whatever it was. And in fact, this idea of having the sort of young children and babies and adults living in different worlds in an animated series did happen in a series called The Rugrats, made in the United States not that many years after I made this series. So, I didn't make this series, I tried to make this series. And I didn't actually shoot a pilot for The Little Ones. I didn't have to, because the idea was I was going to write the series, and I did write the first 5 episodes. I storyboarded the first 5 episodes, and it was going to be shot at the BBC on the BBC film rostrum cameras, which I knew all about by then, and I knew they hadn't got enough work. So the idea was, why don't we shoot it there? And I would basically write it, produce the artwork, take it to the BBC, they would shoot it, they would do the sound, put the music on, and it would be a BBC show. I wasn't even trying to maintain the rights. And I did pretty well with this. I managed to get to someone called Teresa Plummer-Andrews, who was the chief of, or head of buying programmes for children's BBC, commissioning editor. And I got to go and see her, and she'd seen all the scripts by this point in time. She knew I could do it because she'd seen the Heartbeat animation. It was clearly going to work. It could have been attached to a producer I was already working with on Heartbeat. So there was lots of, it was a good plan to make it work. Work for the rostrum team, work for me. BBC got a series which would have been much cheaper than many others, and everyone would have been happy. Unfortunately though, the series never got commissioned. And it wasn't because of the scripts, it wasn't because of the animation or anything else like that. It was because when I went to see Teresa Plummer-Andrews, I didn't have a merchandising deal. And at that point in time, the BBC would not commission a new children's show unless it had scripts and all the other stuff and a merchandising deal. And sadly, 6 weeks after that, the BBC governors, or whatever they were called at the time, absolutely lambasted children's BBC for doing this, said you must stop doing it. You must not make programmes on the public sector broadcaster which are linked to merchandising, or at least it can't be the thing that actually drives it. And so 6 weeks later, it would have got commissioned. And I'll never know what would have happened if things had been slightly different to that. I might have got the commission for this series, but I didn't because of that. And eventually I had to go to Plan B. Plan B was to go and to work in a university as a lecturer. That's what happened for the next 25 years, on and off. So that's where we got to. But I did try to take the Little One series elsewhere. I remember talking to a guy called Bob Godfrey. Some of you may have heard of Bob Godfrey. He was a very famous British animator. He made a series called Noah and Nellie. He made a series called Rhubarb and Custard, which was quite popular, sort of hand-drawn animation with marker pens on paper. Really, really cool show. Used to go out before the news again, 5-minute episodes. And he made a series called Henry's Cat, where there were 5 series in total, about 50-something episodes. I've even got the record for that here. Here is Henry's Cat. It used to look, here's Henry's Cat, look, here he is. And just to prove you could make series of 10 5-minute episodes, this is the record of 10 5-minute episodes of Henry's Cat. He even got a record as well. So Henry's Cat was very successful on the BBC. And I did get to ring up Bob Godfrey, and I got through to him. And we had a chat about the state of animation in the UK and what I could do with my series that they wouldn't buy because of the merchandising. And he said to me, he said, Chris, he let me talk it through. He said, you've got much further than me in the past few years. And at this point in time, he'd made the first 4 series of Henry's Cat and hadn't made one for about 2 or 3 years. And he would eventually make more Henry's Cat. He'd make 4 more episodes out of 50-something, and then 2 years later. But he had a 5-year gap in the middle. He was in this middle point in time where the BBC, you just couldn't get commission from the BBC. So he basically told me I'd done very well, nothing he could do. And to be honest, that conversation was when I really went to Plan B and went off to become a university lecturer. But anyway, The Little Ones was a nice idea for a series. And again, I've got some materials here, so let's take a look at these. And what we have here are some character sheets. Here's one for Ginny. I think her brother is underneath. There he is. There is the baby character. Here is something about the mother character. And then we've also got here some storyboards. I storyboarded 5 episodes of this. I used to do my storyboards on standard A4 paper, which was unusual, but it worked for me, so there we are. You can see there's a bit of a storyboard, lots of exciting things going on in this episode, as it were. And then under here we have a cel I found this morning. This was very exciting when I found this. This is a cel of the mother character, the mummy character, which looks really good, doesn't it? And again, we turn it to the back. Paint on the back doesn't look quite as good as the paint on the front does. It looks really nice to have that. And there must have been cels in all my development work of the other characters, but I can't find them. But I have got this photograph, which, as you can see, shows you what the characters would have looked like on screen. And also under here, there were also some drawings. I did do a little bit of animation and line tests and things. And what we can see, particularly with these drawings, is that I often used to do more than one shot on the same set of bits of paper and cels, because cels were very expensive. Cels still are very expensive. So if you could do multiple shots on a set of cels, you could save a lot of material. So you had to coordinate it very well, but it would work. And this is, I think, a shot of them. Oh, look, they're being happy. Let's find the end of it. Where is it? And hello. That's good, isn't it? Here's a shot of a banana being squashed. Anyway, as I said, I never actually shot and finished off any fine animation for this particular series, but I do have the storyboards we were just looking at, and so I thought to end this segment I would bring to life some of these storyboards by again narrating things myself, so you can get a bit of a feel of The Little Ones. One morning, Mummy told Morris and Ginny that she had to go out to have her hair made nice again. The 2 toddlers were very excited to be left alone for a little while, and were even more thrilled when Mummy left them each a banana as a special treat. As she left, Mummy reminded her kiddies to be extra good, to look after baby, and not to pour orange squash down the back of the television. The last video on this channel was called Animating for the BBC, and in a sense this video could be called Trying to Animate for the BBC or Channel 4 or anybody else who would have given me a commission for a Cel Animated TV series back in the early 1990s. And things didn't actually stop when I went off to become a university lecturer. They did for a few years, but I started making TV series pilots again, just using computer animation rather than cel animation. And this is something I will cover in another video. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.